helping people to really bring equity away from just the conversation and into the classroom and provide a better educational experience for all children, especially for children of color, who seem to be the children whom are underserved in our country. And so tonight, I'm honored to be with you. This is my home. I grew up in Berkeley, and I work in Berkeley because I have roots here, and I really believe that this is a fantastic community and that there are great possibilities. And I also believe that Berkeley is a place where landmark things happen. And so tonight, this is one of those landmark occasions. I am so proud to introduce and to bring our panel's members, if they're going to come. As I say, bring them. They're sitting in the back. Have found this challenge that's come to light to be one that you would give up a Friday night to come and have a conversation around. So thank you for being here. I just want you to turn to somebody next to you, ask them the question, why are you here, and make sure they give you an answer. All right? Make sure they give you an answer. Here tonight to hear me talk, and I will do very little of that if possible. How many people received note cards as you were coming in the door? All right, good. So those note cards are for you to write questions on. We will not take questions tonight from the floor, meaning that we will not allow you to stand and present questions, but we will take your questions on note cards. Because of limited time, we cannot guarantee that we will be able to answer every question. Your questions will be sorted by themes, and we will try to make sure that we address every theme that is posed by the audience if time permits. So if you have a question tonight, we'd like for you to write it on the note card, wave it in the air. Someone who has a note card, just hold it up. Just wave it, just like this lady right here. See this one right in the front? Wave like that, okay? And someone will come and receive the note card from you and take it to our assistants who are helping to sort those cards tonight. So I want to kind of start the evening just by way of introduction, and I know many of you know why we're here tonight and the incident that brought us here. But I want to really honor the space and to say that this is a hard conversation, and I want to appreciate the Bells for bringing a very private incident to the public forum so that we can use it as a teachable moment as a community, because this is really about growth as a community. It's about healing, it's about racial reconciliation, but even more, it's about a legacy. And what we do tonight will be our legacy for our children. And that's why I call this a landmark event, because tonight we will hear the story from the victims, we will hear the story from a business owner, and then we will talk as a community about how we move forward around racial conversations and issues that happen in the city of Berkeley. We are not just bringing the elephant in the room, because the elephant's always in the room, but we are acknowledging that elephant tonight and deciding that the elephant can't stay here any longer, right? So we're going to start with just a portion that we call the story, and I want to introduce those who are going to tell the story from their perspective. First, I'd like to introduce Melissa Hudson Bell, PhD. She recently completed both her MFA in experimental choreography and her PhD in critical dance studies at the University of California, Riverside. Her research investigates the dynamics of audience engagement, specifically how and why food imagery and food sharing practices are being incorporated in contemporary dance performance spaces in both the San Francisco Bay Area, Before birthing her second daughter last fall, Bell worked as associate professor in the theater and dance department at the Santa Clara University and ran a small dance company, Bread and Butter Dance. Bell is the Club Program for the Arts Fellow a Dean's Distinguished Fellow, a Master's Thesis Research Grant recipient, and a Zellerbach Family Foundation Community Arts Grant recipient. Ooh, that's a mouthful.
Too many people here on this show. That's so weird.
And she is the wife of the somewhat famous Ashley Welding, House of Cards loving guy sitting right next to her. Mr. W Kamau Bell. He moved to the Bay Area in 1997. Let's welcome him. He came with dreams of becoming a famous comedian. Did that happen for you? Okay, he's working on it. He was going to spend a couple of years here and then move to LA, like most Bay Area comedians. But after living here for a while, well, for more than a couple of years, he set down roots here, creating the best of his work and career and meeting a grad student named Melissa Hudson. He decided that fame was going to have to come on his terms, and it did. And it took him to New York for 2 years, but now he and his family are back in the Bay Area where they belong. And they are never moving out of the Bay Area. You may know him from Totally Biased. You will soon know him from his new TV show on CNN, The United Shades of America. But many of you will just know him from riding on the bark. And then I'd also like to introduce, oh, Michael, I don't have a bio for you. I'm going to introduce Michael without a bio. Nope. So Michael's going to introduce himself.
Anyway, for the past 7 years, I've been working on programs with social justice
That's not gonna work.
and in Berkeley and in Oakland also. And I'm the owner of the Elmwood Cafe, and I'm going to keep my bio to write that, and I'll talk later on. Go ahead.
So I'm sure that many of you have read news articles and been online and looked at blogs and have heard the story of the incident that happened on January 26th. Tonight we actually get to hear the story from those who were involved. And so we're going to start on this side with this part of the panel, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panel members a little later on. But I'm going to ask each of the panel members to my left to describe the incident from their own perspective, and then talk a little bit about how it impacted you personally, and then share your actions. What did you do, both professionally and personally, after this incident? So Michael, we can start with you. Well, why don't we start with the lady? Yes.
I want to start. Hi, thank you so much for being here. It's really great to have so many people interested in hearing the story and talking further. So, again, I'm sure many of you have read the blog post that Kamau and I wrote. Some of you may have not gotten to it or saw it on one of the other media outlets, sort of a version of it. You still can't hear me.
Can you hear me? Yes. You can hear me? Okay. Why don't we all use this one?
Good.
How's this? Okay. So on that day, which happened to be Kamau's birthday, we dropped our daughter off at preschool, and I insisted on going out to breakfast at the Elmwood Cafe, one of my favorite places. And we went and had breakfast there, had a lovely time. I went to meet with a mom's group down the street, and after the mom's group, we were having lunch together for the first time, some of my mom's group. And they wanted to go to the Elmwood Cafe. So I was more than happy to oblige. For the second time, we went on down and sat with our babies and our strollers outside and had a lovely lunch. An anti-New York City lunch. And Kamau was working nearby and came to meet us because we were going to drive back home together. And he walked up to where we were sitting at the table, and I quickly introduced him to the women that I was with, who had heard about him, you know, very minimally, had only just found out he was a comedian. And so I was really eager to introduce my husband to these women who I was just forming new relationships with. And he'd probably been standing there 2 minutes maybe saying hello, and he happened to be carrying his computer and a book that he bought at the bookstore next door at Mrs. Dalloway's. And the book, poetically, was about the loving couple who worked in, you know the year, exact year, 67 to strike down the ban on interracial marriage. And that was what the book was about. It was a children's book about this couple that has become this kind of iconic couple in our relationship. So he was showing the children's book to one of the moms in the group, and there was a kind of rapping sound on the window behind me. I thought what I often think, like, oh man, I can't take him out anywhere. People are recognizing him because he's famous. And I looked at him in his face and quickly realized, oh no, that's not what this is. Instead, it was a different but also familiar situation that we found ourselves in over the course of our relationship, which is 12 years strong now, of like, oh, this is someone that does not recognize us as a unit. And so they're seeing this person and something, can we use language? Something really shitty is going down right now. And it was really clear from the expression on his face, like, oh, he's being asked to leave. And it was a moment, I think, that we realized first and sort of stumbled upon verbally, like, is this really, is this happening to you, to me, in front of these people that we don't really know, at this place that I really love? Crap. And so I asked what was going down, and he said that the woman behind the glass was shooing him away, making this very unwelcoming gesture. Needless to say, it sort of halted the conversation at the table. Kamau seemed fairly flustered and really just wanted to leave the situation as quickly as possible. So he started to walk off down the street. I fumblingly excused myself from my mother's group, gathered my 3.5-month-old daughter and our stuff, and started to trail off after him. Oh, you're right. Back up. Before we left, we waited a couple of beats, and there was a woman that came out who worked, we later found was a trainee, right, for the cafe. And she came out with a water pitcher following up on the incident, and we immediately said to her, you know, this is my husband, and this is my wife, this is our kid. And she kind of, you know, said she was sorry, laughed nervously, left with her water pitcher.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
And then I excused myself. And when we were coming back to go to our car and load up to leave, we had to walk again past the cafe. This is after we checked in with one another. You know, are you okay? Am I okay? I can't believe that just happened. Do you not want to walk by the cafe? No, we can walk by the cafe. You know, all these little like micro decisions that you have to make after something like this happens. And we started to get into the car, and I said, you know, I feel like I just have to say something to this woman. So the woman, water pitcher woman that came out, I walked up and I said, you know, I don't really know what to say to you in this situation, but I do know that I have come here a lot and I will never come back. Because what just happened right now was really hurtful to me and to my family, and stuff like that shouldn't happen. She continued to say, I'm sorry, but then said the thing that I really don't care for, which is, I really don't think that it was a race thing. And I'm sure she was well-intentioned and flustered herself, so I can sympathize with that. But having now sort of had the benefit of being in an interracial relationship where I am really facing things that I, as a white woman, wouldn't have to face under other circumstances, can recognize it as a race situation. And I said to her, it absolutely has everything to do with race. I feel very confident that if my husband looked differently than he did, he would not have been treated the way that he was. We may have said a few more words, but that was the general gist of it, and I left sort of shaking, and we went home, and I sat there with my daughter and thought, oh, man, she's 3 months old and already having to be a part of this. And that felt really awful. And we checked in with each other and really, rehashed the situation and came to the conclusion that it was something that we couldn't just sit on and absorb ourselves, but that we wanted to be sure that we talked about and wrote about and tried to create something bigger and better from. I think that'll work for now.
Thank you, Melissa. Yeah,
She said it. Yeah, I think that, the thing that incident was so blatant, I guess is how I feel about it, that it was so, and it was also such a weird, perfect storm of shittiness. And that it was my birthday and I had just bought the Loving book, and it seemed like, and it was just like, there was something that said, and people of color, and this is why we will get off of what happened with us later in this evening, but people of color, I'll say now, experience what is called microaggressions or implicit bias all the time, every day, all the time. But the problem is we can't talk about it all the time because we would sound crazy. And this incident was so blatant, I was like, I can't let this one go. You can't even talk about the implicit bias or microaggressions or racism you experience to your friends who are also in communities of color, because they go, yeah, I get it, dude, it happens. Yeah. We grow exhausted talking about it to each other. But this was so, just the fact that, and there's also this part of me, because, she told the story, that felt like we chose to move back here. This is our home. This is where we, I was told when I was in New York that I say the Bay Area and the more than rappers say Brooklyn, is what I was told. That I rep it hard and don't feel like I represent it, just feel like I'm happy to be a part of it. And to me it was like, if this had happened somewhere else, maybe we wouldn't have written the blog. Maybe it would have just been a joke in my act, because I have lots of jokes in my act about racism, as many of you know who've seen my act. But it felt so different because it happened to our family. And I have one of those moms where I was raised thinking with race consciousness from the earliest memory, and I felt like the reason why we ended up writing the blog is because I have to set a good example for my kids. This is going to be one of those apocryphal stories that you talk about, and I want them to know what happened, what we did in this moment. So I can just say, after we got home, I really, really felt like I needed to reach out to the cafe and figure out if there was some way, one of Melissa's friends later went in that day and talked to somebody else at the cafe about it, who also said they didn't think it was racist, and allegedly also said they still thought I was selling something. That was the whole thing, they thought I was selling something. Despite the fact that I think you're legally allowed to sell things to your wife, but there will be jokes. I can't do it either way. But I felt like so I went online and just didn't see any really Twitter presence for the cafe, and I went and I looked on the website. There wasn't really a clear way to sort of reach out and talk to people. I didn't want to call on the phone and get in the weird phone match with somebody. I saw there was a Facebook page that clearly wasn't updated that often, and I did probably the most vain thing I've ever done in my life. I took a picture of myself wearing the clothes I was wearing that day and said, "You should Google me." Just because I felt like you did this to one of the wrong people. Maybe Cornel West would have been worse, but this is my work. If I don't do this, then I'm not living up to the principles that I've told people I have. And again, there's plenty of cafes for us to eat at. This is on some level about the Elmwood Cafe, but I also knew this kind of thing happens every day, and I have to stand up and sort of let this be heard for the other people who who this happens to who don't have any sort of public profile and can't write a blog about it. So we're absolutely here for the community. Not, we can resolve this between our family. We've talked to Michael about this. There is some level of resolution that is happening, but this is about all of us waking up to this, and those of us who deal with it every day, knowing that we should be able to talk about it. So that's.
Thanks everyone for coming and taking the time out of your schedule. Hello? I was doing this last time, wasn't I? And taking the time out of your schedule to be part of this conversation, because Pam's going to have you all talk to each other later on tonight, and that's what we need to start doing. I told Pam earlier that on this panel, I'm the only one that's never done this before, and I might just hyperventilate and not say what to say, but she said, just talk from your heart and you'll be fine. And I would recommend that to all of you later on, because you're all going to be doing some talking too. I learned about the incident, like most of you, by reading Kamau's blog, and I was deeply upset by it. He does a really good job of putting you in his frame of mind, and I know how many of you have read it, but many of you probably have the same reaction. And he, I got really upset. I called him and I told him how sorry I was that this happened. And later, I was at his house earlier this week and we were talking about it again, and I said, I think the feeling I felt was shame. I think that's the best way to put it. It was shameful. And I couldn't let it slide. I was like, we can do better than this. What can we do so that this doesn't happen, so that this kind of thing doesn't happen? And he was telling me that, what he's talking about today, about how, sorry, never done this before. How's this? It's good? Yeah. How, Berkeley has this worldwide reputation for being the most liberal city in the United States, the most progressive, and you would think that would mean the most inclusive. But we who live here, you guys all know that racism exists here in Berkeley every day, and this is happening all the time. And we need to start having this conversation, because in order to do something about it, we need to start talking about it. And we all need to start talking to each other about it. We're going to be talking about implicit bias tonight, and in some of our brainstorming, we realize that there is no training for retail and restaurant workers on implicit bias. It just doesn't exist. And there really should be. So we're going to do something about that. We're going to start.
Yes, there is.
Go ahead.
There's a lot. I feel like if they need to do those things, they can make them happen. I'm sorry.
Okay, so
It's
here's
okay.
what we're saying. Okay.
I'll give you that liberty. I won't give it to anyone else tonight.
But that's what I'm talking about. We're going to make it happen. We are going to start a program on implicit bias training and education for people in the service industry that work in restaurants and in retail stores. We've reached out to several folks already. I had a couple meetings with Race Forward, which is an organization that Kamau's been involved with. While I'm plugging people, Glenn Singleton, met with him earlier this week. He wrote a book called Courageous Conversations About Race. It's a great book. You guys should read it if you haven't read it.
Some of them probably have.
Yeah. I was sorry, plugging Race Forward. I got to plug them. And we spoke to members of the City Council. We spoke to numerous people from Berkeley Unified School District. And we want everybody's input on this program. But this program is going to happen. I'll give you, at the end, there's a website that's going to come up and an email address. We want to hear from all of you. And so first we will train the staff and the management of the cafe in implicit bias and microaggressions. And from that we will derive a curriculum and some learning materials. And then we will go door to door to all the other restaurants and businesses in the Elmwood, and there's about 60 of them, talk about our experience, talk about what we're learning here tonight and what we will learn in the coming weeks, and offer them the curriculum so they can implement it with their staff and their management also. but then it will be also available to every retail and business and restaurant in Berkeley. And that will make Berkeley the first city in the United States that has those curriculums available to small businesses. There's a website. It's going to be implicitbiastraining.com, and it will launch along with the program. But right now, the email is available. It's info@implicitbiastraining.com. I'll say it one time, info@implicitbiastraining.com. We want to hear from all of you. Give us your input. Give us your, your suggestions, or you want to help out, or whatever your contribution is. We would love to hear from all of you. There's other great speakers going to speak tonight. I'm here to listen and learn. So, Pam.
So Michael's a little bit nervous, and he did his intro and his closing statement all in one. So we can add that 10 minutes back in from the end. Okay. Thank you. All right, so just a couple of housekeeping things. If you are sitting right down this middle, we need to make sure that we have an aisle because of the fire code. So please make sure that we have a clear aisle right down the middle. Thank you so much. If you have questions, wave them in the air. Wave them now, wave them. Question cards. Who's collecting the question cards? They're coming. Can we get a couple of people to collect question cards so we can get them to the stage? So tonight we're kind of framing this conversation around racial microaggressions. We're having a conversation that will bring race into the room and keep race on the table and isolate race because according to the victims of this incident, it was a racial incident in their minds and in their hearts. So we're really talking more about impact and not intent. And when we're talking about racial microaggressions, we have to understand what they are. So how many people have heard that term before? Good, racial. So great, so you are now the gurus. Raise your hand again. Racial microaggression. All right, turn around to someone who does not have their hand up and tell them what racial microaggressions are. Here you go. Come on, talk. Good. Give them the short version. American Psychological Association, for those of you who want to Google, make sure that we do know what racial microaggressions are. They are brief and commonplace daily, verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults to people of color. Okay? That is our working definition tonight. So we've invited some experts to the panel tonight to help us as a community think about how we're going to use this moment to transform and to transform our community's racialized story, right? Because from this day forward, we will never be the same. We won't go back and commit these microaggressions in this community because we're coming into knowledge of how they injure people in our own community. So tonight we've invited Khadijah Means. She is a senior at Berkeley High School in the International Baccalaureate program. She is also off to Howard University next year. She didn't know I knew that. She's telling me she hasn't decided, but her mom and I, we've decided. So just so she knows, we had that conversation last night. She's the president of her school's Amnesty International Club and the co-pharaoh of the Black Student Union. Means is also currently serving a term on the Berkeley Youth Commission, and she's the lead organizer of the December 10th Black Lives Matter walkout. She received the MLK Next Generation Leadership Award. Yes. Welcome, Khadijah, to the panel. We also have on the panel tonight, Jamie, I always call you just Jamie, let me get your last name right. Osman? All right. Jamie is
On my son.
Thank you. I'm a son. Sorry. All right. That's what happens when I go around this community just using first names. Jamie is a facilitator, teacher, curriculum developer, and leadership coach, currently working as an equity-focused design and leadership coach, and is the leader of the Equity Collaboration in Berkeley, California. You guys got a lot of stuff on here. Prior to leading the Equity Collaboration, he held the position of senior coach at the National Equity Project in Oakland. He has also held the position of Director of Learning and Teaching at the Pacific Educational Group in San Francisco, and has been a public school teacher at every grade level of the system. He received his master's in education from Stanford University. Woo! He has focused his 20 years education. Oh, I'm sorry, did you see Berkeley? No, I'm just kidding. As a teacher and professional learning provider, working with schools and school district teams to create more equitable learning environments, incorporating observation, collaboration, and changing instructions to meet best practices and the needs of students. Let's welcome Jamie. All right, we also want to welcome Novella Coleman to the stand from the ACLU. Welcome her. Welcome her. She's a staff attorney at the ACLU of Northern California, where she focuses on racial justice, religious freedom, and civil rights and civil liberties enforcement in the Central Valley. Prior to joining the ACLU as a staff attorney, Novella focused on racial justice and equal protection laws as the Judge Constance Baker's Civil Rights Fellow at the Equal Justice Society. Before that, Novella worked on the criminal justice and drug policy reform as an intern at the National ACLU Former Drug Law Reform Project and as a fellow at the Northern California affiliate. Novella earned her law degree at Harvard Law School, woo! At Stanford, woo! She earned her MA in education and her undergrad degree in mathematics and philosophy. Welcome, Novella. And last but not least, right here from home, we have Nikki Jones. Let's welcome her, Professor Nikki Jones. Nikki Jones is Associate Professor in the Department of African American Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. She is also, thank you. She is also a faculty affiliate with the Center for the Study of Law and Society. Her areas of expertise include urban and race and ethnic relations and criminology and criminal justice, with a special emphasis on the intersection of race, gender, and justice. Professor Jones has published 3 books, including the solo author Between Good and Ghetto, African American Girls and Inner City Violence, published in Rutgers University's Press series in Childhood Studies. Let's welcome Nikki to the stage. So we're just going to go, since we only have one mic, we'll just go straight down if that's okay, or if you all have an order that you want to speak in and add your voice to this conversation.
Good afternoon, evening. It's evening. Good evening. Can you hear me? Wait, I would like to clip this because I feel like that might work. Can you hear me? Yes. All of you in the back? Great. All right, so I think I'm supposed to be talking about my shared lived experience, my lived experience that's prompted me to become a racial justice advocate. So number one, I want to say that I've been black all of my life. So that's a pretty good amount of motivation for me to be a social justice advocate. Number two, one of the biggest things I took away from elementary school was we used to have assemblies, and each assembly you could get a citizenship award. And the best citizenship award was the empathy award. Well, there was a megastar, but I got that, and that wasn't that cool. Empathy is the best one. And here's why. Because sympathy is about feeling bad for someone and seeing their situation and feeling bad and wishing it was better for them but not really doing anything. And empathy is about actively putting yourself in someone else's position, in their shoes or from your own lived experience, and understanding where they're coming from. And so that was a really big take home for me from like kindergarten, second grade-ish area. And so I think that really challenged me to fight for social justice and equity, because I wanted all the people who didn't lead the life that I did, who didn't have the parents that I have, or the family structure that I have, to have those opportunities. So number one, Black on my life, I love empathy. Like, that's a big thing for me. I teach everyone about empathy. I think it's super important, and I think it builds our community and makes us a lot stronger when we know about empathy. So race has always affected me. Like Kamau, I learned about race at a really young age, maybe like 2 or 3. My dad has a really good way of teaching about like fractions. When he would make me toast, he would cut it in half and be like, this is half, this is a fourth. That's a really cool way. So I learned about race in a kind of similar way, learning that white didn't mean white like paper, but it was a racial construct. Yeah, I learned that pretty young. That was weird. But important. And so I learned about that, and I learned about injustice, and I faced some injustices. Oftentimes, I was reading Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria for my African American psychology class, and we were talking about how, in a lot of ways, Black students, or just people of color in general, learn about racism at a much younger age, like 4 or 5, and white students learn about it around like 13 or 14. And because I learned about it so young, and it's generally because they experience racism or microaggressions, that's how they learn about it. It's normally not because their dad's really great and they just tell them. It's because of lived experience, it's because of dealing with racism. And so because of that, Black students and people of color learn about that a lot younger. And so when I learned about it, and I really got a good grasp of what inequity looked like. My parents make a little bit of money. I wouldn't say we're rich, but we're definitely not impoverished. So I knew that I had food every night, and I learned about homeless people, because in Berkeley there's a lot of homeless people, and I learned about homelessness, and that kind of pushed me to fight for equity also. So one more thing, I guess. My family, some of my family's here. Can we give a round of applause? I love them all very much. And one thing that I learned from them, and another reason that I'm such a big advocate for social justice, is because they always told me not to be satisfied with being average. I think I got a C once, which was a really sad day for me. Because my parents were upset. I was like, oh, it's okay, I'm average. Everybody's average. How cool is this? There's other people who are average. And my entire family was like, you cannot be average. Don't be satisfied with the status quo. Being average and being satisfactory is not enough. You're destined to do great things. They love saying that. And so they always pushed me to do more. And so if I was satisfied with living in a racist society, then I wouldn't do anything else. I would just walk around, accept the microaggressions and accept the racism. I wouldn't lead protests. I wouldn't fight for equity across the board. That means LGBTQ rights. That means, like, for Black people, that means against classism. I'm against ageism also. I'm against a lot of things. And I just fight for equity across the board, because I feel like if you're gonna live, why not live so that everyone can live a great life like you do, or better. So yeah. Yes, thank you. That was great. Okay, how's that?
Clip it up close.
Higher? How's that? How's that? Better? Okay, put on my professor voice. Good evening, everyone. And the last time I was here talking to the community at Berkeley was after Black Lives Matter. And a good deal of my current work looks at race and police-civilian encounters. And so that made a lot of sense. And so one question is, well, how does my work overlap with the conversation that we're having here? And I think one way that it does is that we can often think that the bias that police officers hold is unique to the category of police officers. But actually this unconscious bias, implicit bias that we're talking about is actually distributed across the population. And I think that you see it come out in an interaction like this. So what I want to give you today in the 5 minutes that I have to talk to you is just to introduce a concept, a new way of thinking about the incident that occurred and these incidents as they occur each day again and again. And here I'm going to draw on the work of Elijah Anderson, who's a Yale sociologist. He has a book called Cosmopolitan Canopies, Race and Civility in Everyday Life. And I strongly encourage you to take a look at it. And in that book, he makes the argument that even in the Obama era, in the post-civil rights moment, we still live in a world that is deeply socially divided by race. Right? And so that much of our social world is divided into what we might call black space and white space. Right? And black space is typically associated with the ghetto, right? And in many ways, the ghetto has taken on iconic status in our minds, right? And so this idea of the iconic ghetto. And the ghetto is where black people live, right? The idea is where poor black people live, where dangerousness and criminality is located. Right? That's the idea. And how do we know that? Most people haven't been to the ghetto. Right? I used to teach in Santa Barbara, and people would say, oh, that's so ghetto. Never been to a ghetto, right? Most people haven't been there, how do they know, right? Well, media, music, TV, right? So you don't have to be in the ghetto to know the ghetto, or to at least think that you know the ghetto. But what's happening now is that the ghetto is not just a place, right? It's perceived to be a type of person, right? And the ghetto itself is believed to be carried on the body, right, on and in black people, right? And that presents special dilemmas when black people are in white space. And what's white space? Well, just about everywhere else, right? So the university that I teach, it's white space. And my students experience it as such. Movie theaters, restaurants, cafes, right? White space. So in these white spaces, black people have a special burden, and they face a number of dilemmas, right? And the dilemmas are structured by the belief in the minds of many people, white people, and black middle class people can hold on to this as well, is that somehow they may be associated with the ghetto. Right? There's a deficit of credibility. Black people in white space occupy a provisional status position. They have to prove, right, that they belong there. And they have to prove that they belong. The burden is on them to prove that they belong in a particular space. Now let's we've been talking about microaggressions and that kind of thing, but let's go back to the incident. Who belongs in that space? The presumption of who belongs in that space. What is the presumption about what Kamau is carrying on his body? Right? Because we have to keep it tied to people. Right? We have to remember that we're talking about people. And so we can't let the theories take us too far away from that. And so this deficit of credibility can trouble the most basic interactions. This other thing that it can do is expose black people to what Elijah Anderson describes in his book. And I'll put this in quotes, so I don't recommend you go around, saying it exactly how I'm about to say it. Right? The nigger moment. Right? The nigger moment. When I was talking about this backstage, and we were talking a bit about this, Khadijah said, I just had one of those on the bus on the way over here. Right? And so what is that moment? Right? It's a moment of acute disrespect experienced by a black person in white space. It could be intentional or otherwise, but the outcome, right, is that somehow you feel as if you're being put back into your place. Has anyone had a moment like that? Right? 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 And so and what I like about Anderson's use of that language, and it's provocative, right? But it reminds us what we're talking about, right? It reminds us what we're talking about, right? Because what this gets down to is not just interactions. And interactions are important, but there's also a deep structural problem. So Anderson has this idea of cosmopolitan canopies, this idea of spaces that are shared. So if anyone's been to Philadelphia, that's where I did my schooling. There's a place called Reading Terminal Market that Anderson writes about that people from all over the city come to. And there's racial and ethnic diversity, but there's class diversity as well. Right? People come together, and as he describes it, it's a kind of timeout for race relations. People need to kind of be in that space and the expectations that there will be a lot of different people in that space. And my question is, are the spaces in Berkeley, cosmopolitan canopies, right, are they white spaces? How are they structured? How is the city structured? And how is that reflected in the space that people share? Right? And so I'll stop there. But hopefully we can come back to that. Hopefully that's provocative enough for us to come back to it.
Talk about what you're thinking about right this minute. Where are your thoughts right this minute? New partner, try a new partner, try a new partner. Not that same old partner, not the one you can't do. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Jamie, are you going next? Novella, okay, thank you.
Good evening. Back, hear me?
Okay, here.
Higher? Yeah? Here? Yeah. All right, so what I'm going to do is talk about this from my perspective as a black person, as a black attorney, as a black civil rights attorney. And I think one of my challenges when I'm thinking about racial justice and progress is that it's easy for me to want to take the easy route and look at it through the lens of the law and just, check the boxes of all the victories we've had in the law, like end of slavery, check, Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, decisions like Brown v. Board of Education, decisions like Loving v. Virginia. And I think the law is all about making things coherent into one nice tailored story, and supposedly the decisions that are made are framed in a coherent fashion so that there's some continuous direction. But having studied law and having practiced law, I know that the law is not like that and reality is different. The folks who are making those decisions, who are writing the laws, who are interpreting the laws, who are applying the laws are folks like us. They are people who have implicit bias in them, who live in a society that is filled with racial bias and stereotypes that are shaped, that shape how we see each other, the stereotypes that are triggered when we're in certain environments. And so all of that contaminates. Like this? Oh, yes, it is.
Just hold it right in there. You have to really close.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. All right. So I would say one of the challenges as a lawyer is that we can celebrate the victories that we've had in the law when it comes to racial justice, but one of the huge failures of the law that it continues to struggle with and has in the past is that it doesn't recognize implicit bias in most circumstances. And so when you have an incident like what happened to the Bells, what you'll have is, how can we prove that this incident was motivated by race? That's what the law requires you to prove. It has to be intentional. And for the most part, the law doesn't acknowledge the fact that folks act on implicit biases, that they harbor racial prejudices that they're not consciously aware of. And so there can be a lot of people who are egalitarian, who want to live in a meritocracy, who think people
should be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, who see themselves as progressive, whose family members see them as open-minded, liberal people, but who can still buy into those racial biases, and when they're in a situation where it's triggered, act upon them. And so what the law does is require you to explain something in terms of race. And for the most part, if someone like the employee at the Elmwood Cafe can provide a race-neutral explanation, like, I thought you were just trying to sell something, then the law is usually okay with that. That's usually good enough. And what that means is that we're left in a legal system that has done a very poor job of acknowledging the racial bias that's in our society. So we have laws that are written in a way that does not acknowledge the impact on folks of different racial groups. We have disparities in our drug laws, we have disparities in our sentencing, we have disparities in arrest rates, we have disparities in people who are sentenced to death. Pretty much any time there's an ambiguous situation and race is at play, the law will side on the, weigh in on the side of saying that this was okay and that people were just doing the right thing. So for me, this panel is a positive step forward, and it's exciting because somebody was brave enough to say this was about race. And they were brave enough to articulate it and to require people to listen to them. And then we had the owner of the cafe responding, and rather than just, trying to wade through the uncomfortable moment or pretend like it didn't happen, he stopped. And it's not that his decision, the way he decided to deal with that eradicated racism everywhere. That didn't happen. But what it did is it created this space for people to acknowledge the fact that there is racial bias still in our society, that we're not in a post racial society, that people aren't colorblind. And so I think the promise here is that we can sit in that awkwardness for a bit and deal with those emotions and decide together, talk through what should we do in situations like this. And the fact that people in this room are coming from all walks of life means that you can then take your experience and carry it to whatever your workplace is. People who are working in stores can use that in their interactions with customers. People who are working in schools can influence the students, their peers. People who are working in businesses can influence that industry. And rather than be okay with the status quo, we can challenge ourselves to do better.
Hi. Hello. Buenas noches. ¿Cuántos hablan español? Some of you might struggle then. My name is Jamie Mansan. I'm the teacher of the group. I taught. That's what I think of myself as. I think of myself as I taught every grade level. I taught special ed elementary. Was my first year teaching. I always joke that's what not to do with the least experienced teacher model. I got into education because I wanted to be the Mexican teacher I never had. That's what I wanted to do. I remember being in high school and sitting in class, in Spanish class particularly, and being surrounded and being asked, hey, we're going to study Bolivia. Jamie, what do you think? And I was like, I'm from here. I don't even know where Bolivia is. And that this feeling as a kid growing up of disconnect in school that I had, that was very, very pronounced. When I look back to school, I don't look back fondly. And it's not that I didn't do well, I did fine. But I don't look back to it and say it's because of school. And I didn't, this is a mandated structure that folks have to go to. We send our children to this thing. And it doesn't have to be that way. And so as a result, I got into it, and I thought, you know what, I'm getting into this to support and change things for Mexican kids. That's why I'm here. In fact, I remember when people asked me, like, well, why are you, teachers were sharing, like, why did you choose to be a teacher? And there's a bunch of folks saying, I like kids. Kids are great. It got to me and it was like, no, I don't even like kids that much. I'm not here for all kids. I didn't get into it for all kids. I got into it for Mexican kids. I don't even like Cuban kids. And if you want to know why I chose this, that's why I chose it. And then as I got into it and I started to teach, I met kids who weren't like me, who didn't experience the same things that I did in terms of my life, but yet experienced the same disconnect, the same horrible feelings that I had when going to school. And I said, wow, that's crazy. How is that possible? You're not me. Right. And that's what has led me to be the educator that I am. I work in schools in order to address the impact of implicit bias as it relates to schooling. That it is about changing I have yet to meet the teacher who got into teaching to make sure that certain kids don't make it. Right? Because if that's what you want to do, like if you want to target kids, if you want to bully kids, like we could do that. There's probably some kids in the room right now. Like we could do that. And if you're going to do it through teaching, that seems silly. What a silly job. This job's way too damn hard, excuse me. It is hard. So people don't choose it for that, and yet that's the experience daily. And so why? Well, you carry your bias with you when you walk in the door. Everybody carries it with them. When they meet the teacher that says, oh, I checked my bias before. It's crap, that's crap. No, here's how it works. Your brain will make decisions before your conscious brain can check it. And so, my job is to raise that and to say, how does that show up in our instruction, in the way in which we treat and work with families? How does that show up in how we set up school? I mean, even the way we're sitting now. I'm like, Lord, everyone in this room, if you've gone to school, you've sat in this very structure. Like, well, how do we expect change to happen when we sit the exact same way that we sat when we were 5? Lord, I believe that if you want to change something, you're going to actually have to say, I want to change that. And so what do I think it takes? I think it takes 2 things, really. I think it takes that we've got to learn how to listen. I think that is a skill that takes a ton of practice. I think it has to be about listening to others before you have a desire to share your idea. Like I'm preaching, right? Right? And so, to listen first means to say it's not about you. And that's really hard. That's really hard. And I don't mean that's hard like that's hard to do. You're right, and you know. No, I mean like your brain is hardwired to believe it's about you. It's hardwired to believe that. And so you have to first check that. Like, right, I'm going to listen first. Second, after you listen, I'm actually going to try and interrupt this on a regular basis. How do you do that? You got to practice a lot. A lot. I do not believe a community forum, I'm sorry, this is the pessimist in me. I do not believe a community forum. I know, she said, Nikki's like, Jamie, you're last, you're the optimist, you're the happy one. And I'm like, I'm a happy pessimist. That's what I am. I think it won't work. I believe I'm a 20-year public educator. My kids go to Berkeley schools. My son goes to Washington. My youngest son goes to Hopkins. And I'm telling you, I don't believe it's going to work. And I'm working to make it different. Because just because I don't believe it's going to work doesn't mean I'm not going to do something about it. All right? I mean, I come to a community forum because I feel honored to be standing in front of you. I mean, part of me wants to say, like, someone call my mom right now. Call her. Take a picture, like, Kamau Bell's right there. Yeah. Send that video. I feel honored to be asked to be up here, to say, hey, I got an idea. I got something we could talk about. And so I come here to bring that expertise. Truthfully, I don't think of myself as an expert. I don't think there is such a thing. I think that I've got some ideas, but so does everybody. My mother is smart. And so my mother has some ideas. She's an expert. She raised me. All right. I appreciate you guys listening. Thank you.
To interrupt racist acts. So now you're going to turn to someone behind you, and you are going to share the last time you interrupted a racist act.
Wow.
Could be yours, somebody else's. All right, say your last word. Last word. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This time I want you to thank your partner for sharing. So make sure you shake their hand, thank them for sharing. Great. Let's come back into our collective space. Let's come back into our collective space. So I want to thank everyone who sent questions out. We have a lot more questions than time. So as I said at the beginning, we're going to try to answer them by themes. You can't hear me in the back?
That's because everybody's talking.
It's okay. That's why I'm talking in the mic, and then they'll eventually stop. See? Told you. All right. Thank you. We're going to answer your questions in themes. So if I don't read the question that you wrote, it means that we kind of put them all together. And the first theme, I think I'll start with Michael and Kamau, because there were some questions directly directed that people wanted you to answer. I'm going to come back to you, Khadijah. Just give me a second. Relax, girl, relax. And then we'll move to our general questions. So there were quite a few questions around the firing of the waitress, and so we'll kind of bring those all together and use this question as the question, Michael, around that. Why was the worker fired, and was there a way to repair her attitude instead?
That's a great question, because I was seeing it the ones that were directed at me. Hello? Most of the questions directed at me, that was the question. And I want your participation in this too, because I should lay out for you what happened and then what decision I made, and then I would like you guys to raise your hands what your opinions are, because this is a great chance. You're all here. You know, this is the our neighborhood. Can you hear me? Okay.
People talking only adds to the...
No, I'm fine. I'll do it this way. This is fine. I want to have you guys, because this is a great chance. You're all here, and I want to get some feedback in guys raising your hands on this issue, because I'll tell you, why I fired her, and then I want to know who agrees with me and who doesn't, because this is a really great chance. Kamau and I have talked about this several times. Even today we were talking about it. And what's interesting is that once we got together, we figured out that we had the same core values. We're two guys who just want to be a positive influence in our community. But this is 90% would agree. This is the 10% that he says, well, you didn't have to do that. My feeling was somebody left the cafe feeling unwelcome and uncomfortable there. And I just don't think that we can have an organization like that. I see no middle ground on that. I mean, I don't want to be part of, by the way, our whole staff is here. I don't want to be part of an organization where people don't feel welcome coming there. So this is something that is so core and important to us. So she did that, somebody left feeling unwelcome, and then later there was no chance to she didn't solve, she said sorry, but she didn't solve the problem to the customer satisfaction. And then she never reported it to manager or me. I read about it on the internet. So, now I'm open because Kamau and I have had conversations about this. Kamau wants to meet her, next week and talk to her because that's kind of a separate issue. Obviously, when we have this training program, she will be part of that. But from then on, okay. So here's the question: who thinks? Everyone put your hands up who thinks that I should have fired the waitress, that that was the correct thing to do. Okay.
Can you repeat the question? Because we can't hear you back here.
Okay, so who thinks that that was the right move?
Fire. Fire. Do you want to know why?
Okay, and then who thinks that it wasn't the right move?
Did you try to educate her?
Well, absolutely, and that was in some of the longer forms the same question is like, why can't she go to this program? Of course she can go to this program. She's going to be part of the one that we're coming up with now, but she will also go to the Race Forward program, which is an 8-hour all-day program. I'm signed up for that too on April 10th, and again, I recommend that highly. Yeah, but this is where you go. It's a 50-50 thing in our audience, and Kamau and I will be meeting with her. We'll be talking about this. This is a thing that I'm very open to the community helping us out with, because it is kind of a 50-50 split, just like I thought.
So if you have some advice for Michael, you can make an appointment with him and talk to him about that at a later time.
But I said earlier, I want to hear from everybody on this training program and all your input. That's why I gave you guys an email address if you don't get your questions after today.
Well, I'm sorry, I can't take questions from the floor. We have way too many questions here, so I cannot take questions from the floor. But if you want to continue that conversation with Michael, he's definitely open to that.
What's that email, Michael?
What's your email?
It's info@implicitbiastraining.com.
info@implicitbiastraining.com?
Yes.
Okay. All right, this question is for Kamau. What made you so sure it was a racially motivated act as opposed to one directed towards you for other reasons, such as the large homeless population that solicited the cafe?
I love this question. Thank you. First of all, can you hear me in the back? All right, I've done this before. So what I would say about that is why? First of all, one of the reasons that when I moved out here from Chicago to the Bay Area, one of the first things I noticed was the large homeless population, which is clearly in Berkeley. Is there a better word than homeless? You're still working on it? Okay. That there was a large homeless population out here. And what I also noticed is that it didn't seem to bother people the way it bothered people in Chicago where I came from. And so then it started to bother me less than it did bother me in Chicago. And I noticed there was a thing where if you went to a restaurant and you ate your meal, you could leave your leftovers on the thing, and you turn around and they were gone. And there was sort of a sense of not that there was just a way in which the Bay Area sort of, we know it's an issue. We know many of us are working on it, but we're not mad at those people the way they're mad at them in other cities, I would say, is how I feel about it. And so what I'm saying is that, so what if I was homeless? Even if I was homeless, I'm a black homeless guy. You can't take the black out. It just doesn't work that way. I've been black longer than Khadijah. A lot longer. Not that I'm pulling rank. I followed you in the Black Lives Matter protest. I left my house that day and I walked into her thing before I even knew who she was, and I was like, I guess I'm doing this for the day. So I followed that whole thing through Cal's campus because she told me to from a megaphone. So I just don't think you can. And also the other thing I would say is that one thing that the Bay Area did for me, which is why I choose to make this my home and why we were so happy to come back, is that when I moved to the Bay Area coming from Chicago, there's a lot of, I was not a person who would have described myself as homophobic, because I thought that was a hate crime, but I certainly was a person who had homophobia in him. And when I moved to the Bay Area, I slowly had it worked out of my system. And I'm not saying I don't make mistakes now, I'm just saying that I have surrounded myself with people, one of them, Martha Reinberg, who I quote all the time, who will regularly pull my quote to the stupid shit that I say and do. And I recommend you all get a Martha Reinberg or a Melissa Hudson Bell. This one, she's taken. But I have people in my life, some of them are here, that I can look around the room and see people who have pulled my coat at times when I've said or done stupid things on stage or off stage. And one of the big things I would say is that, so to take it off the thing about this being racially motivated, I learned that when somebody comes to you, a friend comes to you, or somebody you think you want to have a relationship with in some way, and says, a thing happened to me that was sexist, if you want to maintain the relationship and the friendship, you shut the fuck up and listen. Sorry, that's the last one I'll drop. But if you want to be in a friendship with somebody or in a community with somebody, when they say something has happened to them and they say a sexist thing or a racist thing or a homophobic thing or a transphobic thing, and you're not a member of that community, so you don't know how the ins and outs of that work, you just shut up and listen. Yes. And so I feel like I know it was racism. I know it was racism. I don't have to, you can listen to me and we can talk about it and discuss, and at that moment, I think somebody, as they said down here, then you go, oh, what can I do to stop this? What can I do to help you with this? The minute you go to, I don't think it was racism, and you're not a person of color from that community, you've just lost a friend.
Okay, this is for the panel members. Implicit bias, unconscious bias can easily allow white people not to take responsibility. Can you address our responsibility to interrupt white supremacy? And this is from a self-proclaimed white person. It's on the paper, just in case you guys are wondering. So, all right. Anyone? You want me to pass it down so you can see it?
Can you read it again? Yeah, sure. Let me read this long thing. Implicit bias, unconscious bias can easily allow white people not to take responsibility. Can you address, our responsibility to interrupt white supremacy, our conditioning, our privilege, the costs we, oh my goodness gracious. Right, yeah, that's good enough, yeah, all right. You gotta like it when a white supremacy is written on a piece of paper like that. Right? Yes, exactly. How do you address it? That bias comes in many forms, and you can't disaggregate it. What I love about the example of the homelessness and black. My mother never leaves the house and goes, you know what? I just want to deal with sexism today. I don't want to deal with racism. It'd be good if I could leave that here. Like, it doesn't happen that way. So all my biases are playing at all times, all at once. And so to address it is you have to be overt about saying, like, I know that I carry bias around race. And then you're going to talk about that one. And you're going to say, I'm going to listen to my own brain. Not just listen to folks, because I have folks like that in my life. And I can't always rely on other folks to tell me to stop. Because then that puts the burden on someone else to say, hey, Jamie, stop being racist, right? And you're like, oh, right, thank you. I'm so glad you're here today. I have to create that for myself. So how do I do that? You've got to what I say is you've got to learn how to listen to your own brain. You got to learn how to listen so that when your brain says that thing in its head, when it goes on automatic pilot and it says that thing, that you have a way of going, I just thought that. And I don't want to replicate that. That's not what I want to be. I want to be different. And so that's when I say listening takes practice, that's what I mean. Listening to yourself is hard. It takes a long time to interrupt that. That's my start. That's my start.
I have a very quick thought that happened in our kitchen earlier today as we were preparing for this event and saying implicit bias, implicit bias, implicit bias. And I think Kamau said, if I hear implicit bias one more time, I think I'm going to barf. Because I think what happens a little bit with the term implicit bias is that we white people don't want to say racism. So as Jamie was just saying, it's recognizing that a lot of those biases exist along the axis of race. And sometimes we adopt alternative language so that we don't have to face the fact that there's a spectrum of racial activity and racism that we need to be aware of in ourselves and in our community.
Oh, so I'm just going to offer, can you hear this? I'm just going to offer a really simple piece of advice that I give my students as well. If you want to disrupt white supremacy, love black people. And if you're black, love yourself, right? Because that's part of it, is trying to convince you, right? If you're black, get like OMC on this. If you're black, love yourself. Right? Because the story is again and again and again to tell you somehow you are less than, and you are not good enough, that you are ghetto, right? And so thinking about ways to disrupt that. How do you do that? You can do it interactionally, and I can talk to you about some of the research that I do on analyzing interactions, right? That can come off as a bit dry. And so the piece of advice I'll give you is to love black people, to challenge anti-blackness everywhere you see it. When you're shopping, when you're in school, where you live, right? And it's a radical act, right? And because it opens you up. And so this is not something that only happened to Kamau. It happened to Melissa, and it happened to their family. And one reason the injury is so deep is because of the connection and the love, right? They're all black, right? And so to me, that's a radical piece of advice.
So hold on to the mic just a second, Professor Jones, because there's another question connected to that. How do you think we can talk about racism and racial microaggressions without shaming people?
Well, shame can be a moving emotion.
Can I just say, what's wrong with shame? Sometimes you should feel bad.
And just to expand on that, the principle of restorative justice, which I imagine that some people in the room are probably thinking about, is that you move from shame to acknowledgement of the harm done, right, to listening to the feelings of the person that was injured, and then at some point at the end of the process, reintegration. And I think that's a powerful model. But I don't think we should be trying to avoid shame because, you know, things aren't just implicit, they're explicit, and they are quite shameful.
Okay, really quickly, I want to say a couple things. Number one, I'm a cheerleader, and we do this thing called spirit fingers. Every time you see something cool or someone makes a free throw, you go like this. And I think that could really help us out as far as us being able to talk, but you can still express like your spirit. So, like when you feel the need to clap, you can do spirit fingers. Okay. Oh, it's beautiful. Okay. Number two, about implicit bias, some words that you should avoid, not to like replace racism or anything, but like don't replace the word black by using the words ghetto or hood or ratchet, because those are not synonymous with blackness. Right. So be careful of that. And also don't run away from uncomfortability. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. Don't run away from uncomfortability. You should feel uncomfortable sometimes. That's how you learn stuff. The first time you rode a bike, were you uncomfortable? Probably. But then you kept going and you learned how to do it, you know? So you can't just expect every situation to feel like a safe space where you're super comfortable and you're probably going to learn. That physics class is probably hard. It works. That physics class is hard and you feel uncomfortable and you push through and you get to it. So learning about race and learning about implicit bias and things like that and white supremacy are hard. They're not going to feel comfortable, especially if you're white, because you play a significant role in it. But it's about learning, and if you want to be better, you have to try in an uncomfortable space. That's just how it is. Cool.
There you go. Okay, so we are over time. We are now at 8:35, and we're willing to stay. We just want to make sure you guys are willing to stay, so just, wiggle your fingers just a little bit, okay, because it's past some people's bedtime, I'm seeing kind of falling asleep. All right, we'll take a couple more of these questions then. How do you encourage small businesses, for anyone on the panel, how do you encourage small businesses to participate in multicultural competency training from an institutional change perspective? How can we make this a mandate instead of optional?
I mean, I feel like small businesses have to understand that when you don't make your space safe for the entire community, you're actually losing business. All of us spend money. All of us spend money. Because I know for a fact that today's March? It's been like 2.5 months since, 1 month and a half since we had our thing at the Elmwood Cafe. They've lost hundreds and hundreds of dollars of our family's business. She likes scones and runny eggs a lot. So that's business that the Elmwood Cafe has lost from us personally. And just to be clear, what we're doing tonight, this doesn't wrap it up, this doesn't resolve it. All the work that needs to be done has to be continued. Me and Michael, when Melissa were in our house, I said, we're still not in a place where we're comfortable to go back to the Elmwood Cafe. I still don't know that I necessarily am ready to sit down there and participate in that business the way I'm ready to talk to Michael. I'm ready to sort of talk about implicit bias and racism, but we're still in a place where we're still negotiating that. So I feel like maybe Michael should talk about, oh yeah, certainly.
All right, so a really great thing that my dad taught me is about money. He's a money manager. And a really important thing that people forget about money is how much power, they don't forget. There's a lot of power behind money. And one thing I just want you to remember is that you vote with your dollars, which is what Kamau, I almost said Kamau again, sorry about that. Kamau is talking about. You vote with your dollars. So if something bad happens to the black community or an instance like this, then we stop voting for Elmwood Cafe or whatever institution it is, And so as far as policy, there's not a lot that I can speak to as far as the policy of small businesses, but I would say that losing hundreds and thousands of dollars from people of color is probably a big enough incentive for them to implement some type of training. You can't promise that they will. They're also generally white-owned if they're having this issue, and so with that said, it's going to be up to them. I can't speak a lot on how they're going to get it in there, but if they're losing money, they'll probably make a change because it's capitalism.
All right. Oh, does someone else want to comment? As a white person, woman, going into a black space, clubs, cafes, neighborhoods, I have also been made to feel unsafe, that I don't belong. How do we all become colorblind and treat each other as just human beings?
And I think it's not that we all can't experience feelings of being made an outsider. We're all outsiders in lots of different ways. There are a number of different axes of our identity. But conceptually, a key distinction between white space and black space that Anderson makes is that white people can visit black space, right? They don't have to, but they can visit. But in order for black people to get ahead, right, to have some social mobility, they have to learn how to live in white space. And then they have to encounter these moments, right, that he writes about again and again and again. And so I think that's a key difference that we have to keep in mind, because it's not the same kind of lived experience.
Has the situation occurred exactly as it... Oh, I'm sorry.
So that's a question that's very similar to some of the questions that teachers ask all the time, right? So I've got some students of color, I don't see color. And my response is what, my first response is, sorry, is one, okay, let's say you don't. But what if the student does? Like, color has been a thing in my family than the moment I was born. my skin color has been a topic of discussion constantly. I'm light. I got praised for it. I got praised like you wouldn't believe. And you normalize this stuff. You normalize the conversations that your parents have, and then all of a sudden your cousins come up to you and go, well, I didn't get that. And you're like, what? This conversation around skin color is something that if it's important to me, then that's a part of my identity. So I am in no way at any point advocating for colorblindness. That this is about understanding that my skin color plays a part in my identity. It plays a part in how I was raised. And so if the kid, and this is what I say to teachers, if the kid cares about it and you don't, then you've just lost a kid. You just lost a kid.
All right, had the situation occurred exactly as it did, except only that the waitress was black, how might your reaction been different?
If it had happened in zero gravity, and Miley Cyrus was made of marshmallows, and I mock because I love. I think, first of all, let me be clear about this. It happened the way it happened. We're talking about the situation that happened, and this is the thing that happens on Facebook and social media all the time. What if, and it's not, what if isn't always helpful, because it's a derailing tactic from, can we address the thing that actually happened? And let's say I'm wrong and that it wasn't racist in that one particular incident. This is, which I believe it was, it was. It still happens to people of color every day. So we don't need, that's why I want to get off negotiating this one particular incident, because there's plenty of people in the room who are people of color who can attest to that this happens all the time, things like this, and much worse. Just to be clear about that. I also know I have worked in the retail industry a lot. This is why I wasn't pulling for this woman to get fired, because I've been at jobs where the institutional policy was, watch the black people. I've worked those jobs. I've been the black guy who had to watch the black people. A lot of times, the security guard in the store is the black guy. Why are they all at C's? So I'm saying, like, this was always from the beginning. We talked about this as an institutional problem. There's something that we believe was going on in the culture of that cafe that led that woman to knock on that window. I wish I could talk to her. I just got handed a letter that she wrote to me and Melissa apologizing. I haven't read it yet. I would love to talk to her. We would love to talk to her, because I don't want to scapegoat her. I don't know what else was happening. I don't want to. It doesn't make any sense to scapegoat her. We probably do disagree on this. I wish she was here. I wish I could talk to her. I wish she still. I don't want her to not have a job. I hope she has a new job. I wish she could be here to be a, because I know the thing that happened. The reason why we wrote about it in the blog is because it wasn't about a bad thing happened at the Elmwood Cafe. We need to boycott the Elmwood Cafe. It's like, this is a prime example of things that happen every day all the time. This woman still lives in the community somewhere. She's still a member of the community. She should have the opportunity to learn something like the rest of us do.
Okay, so we each get 2 minutes to wrap up and give us some advice as a community. Where do we go from here? One of the reasons that we're in this space is around healing, but also around action, so that we won't be the same when we leave. So we'll start with Professor Jones, and we'll just come straight down. What is your advice to our community? Where do we go from here?
I was at a meeting about 5 days ago, and we were talking about inequality in various social domains. And there's something that a professor from Stanford, Sean Reardon, said that really stuck with me. And he said we can talk about, to apply what he said to the present instance, he said we can talk about things like microaggression, right? But we don't talk about microaggressors, right? And that is not to blame, that's not to shame, but it is to help us to appreciate that we are not talking about something out there, and we're not just talking about something in here. But it's not always just implicit, right? It is also explicit, right? And to remember those things at the same time, and to draw on those conceptual frames that aren't passive, that are in fact active, because it's those kinds of things that will move you toward action. And so in the most basic sense is understand that sometimes you can participate in this. And so what does that mean? That means you have to check yourself, right? And you have to think about how you treat people. I think one of the most troubling, one troubling aspect of this that gets erased is how this was done. To bang on the window and say, "Get," that's explicit. And so that's not calling someone nigger, right? But it can feel like a nigger moment. And that is not casting aspersions at all on the wages. But I'm encouraging us not to think of this as just a passive thing, a thing that exists out there. Understand that it has to be an active thing, and it has to be a thing that you take action on.
I would build on that and say there are a lot of situations daily where all of us, I don't think it's just about the white people who perpetuate implicit bias or racism, where all of us participate. Folks who work in white spaces have to deal with the white rules there, and there are consequences to not doing that. And the more each of us each day decide to just buy into that, to make our lives easier and to not create resistance, or like Kamau said, to not seem crazy because you're always bringing it up, the more you tear down that system. So I would say, don't be afraid to disrupt the system. Don't be afraid to feel uncomfortable. When you feel like embarrassed or ashamed, then feel embarrassed or ashamed. Don't rush through to get to the solution, but like go through and process each stage.
I'll build on the same, that I think that implicit to one person is explicit to someone else. And so there's a quote that I love by Wade Davis that says, "Other people's cultures are not failed attempts at being you." And I love it. I'm like, right. Because I carry that in myself. So I don't believe, I don't believe because nobody chooses their race. You're just born. And so as a result, the question, what I have control over is me and what I can learn for myself and how I can learn to check myself, which takes time and effort. If I could say anything that I'd say, don't believe that this will change because of a training. I don't believe you get trained to undo this. I think you can get trained to drive a car. I think you can get trained to change a pipe. I don't think you get trained to undo racism. That's going to take some work. And it's not going to happen because you went to a 3-hour thing.
I want to talk about the colorblindness thing for a little bit before I make my closing statements, because I have to deal with this a lot. I'm in the IB program in IB. I'm in the International Baccalaureate program at Berkeley High. And a lot of students like to say that they're colorblind in an effort to, well, basically this is what they're doing. When you say that you're colorblind, you're denying the struggle and the challenge of people of color to live in a world that's made for white people, quite frankly. And so with that considered, by saying that you're colorblind or that color doesn't matter, you're saying that we should just be you. It's easy if you just work hard, and that's unfair. And you're just stealing the livelihood of people of color. Like, we work all of our lives trying to reach, like, equity, and you're saying you already had it, when in actuality we know for a fact that we didn't. And so I think that you need to stop trying to erase color because you think it's rude to mention someone's race, or it's rude that, like, I don't know, that's just ridiculous to me. I'm sorry, it's hard for me to articulate that. Please don't call people articulate. Don't come up to me after the Please do not do that. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that we don't have time for, but I think just focus less on color blindness, because honestly, you're not going to get a gold star for that. Be more color competent. Be more color aware, because honestly, people from different races have different experiences than you, just like different people have different experiences than you. So you need to I'm not going to tell you what you need to do, but if you want to be a better person, and if you want to help eradicate racism, then you have to take those active steps towards eliminating this idea that race is bad. Your mind makes generalizations. That's what it does. That's why you put people in boxes. It's not bad to do that. It's bad to think that that one generalization is what everyone is. It's to you use that to categorize people because that's how your mind works, but you also have to take a step outside of that and remember that people are individuals. People have different lives. Just because I'm black doesn't mean I act like other black people. Black people built this country, whether you like it or not. Love us, please. Thank you.
I'm not sure how it's ready for her. Michael.
Hello. Hi. I want to expand a little bit on what Jamie said, that so you guys really understand here. Jamie said, like, training isn't going to fix everything. And I want you guys to know that Jamie's the guy who will actually be doing this. Seriously, we understand that. You know, Jamie and I understand that. And that, but here's an understanding. Somebody said to me today, hey, did that thing blow over that happened? And he so didn't get it. It's like, we don't want it to blow over. Blow over is not a good thing. We want to have this awkward conversation about race. We want to talk about this. That's why we call this meeting. And we ask you all who are passionate about the subject to follow along, you know, on the new program and how it works. And this is the beginning of talking about this in a different way.
I think the question was just one thing that we'd like for people to take away. And I guess for me is the request that you just go home and talk to somebody about what happened. Maybe pick somebody that doesn't necessarily want to talk about it. Because I think these conversations sometimes are easy to have a room full of people that are interested in this, that care, that are motivated to spend their Friday night here, to stay long. But we all have friends and relatives and co-workers that could benefit from a conversation that we are not allowing them to have if we just keep it amongst ourselves.
Is this the final? So I got to close? Okay. Yeah, I think to build on what Melissa just said, if the media is going to report on this and there's trucks outside with the gigantic antennas, which maybe go, this is weird, they're going to report on this that they had this event and the event happened, and at the end they're going to talk to you as you walk outside. Feel free to talk to them. They're going to get some clip of somebody going, I thought it was good, I thought it was bad, I don't know, and that's going to be the story of that. This isn't the end. We're the nerdiest, most militant people in Berkeley right now, and don't have Friday night plans. So we're the militant nerds. This is date night. We don't get out much. This is date night, everybody. Yeah. You have to go have that conversation, like my wife said, with somebody who's not here, who needs to have that conversation. You have to go have it. It can actually be on social media, but have it the way we talk about here, in a respectful, productive way where you call somebody out on their racism. But I prefer to be in 3D. I prefer to be a conversation where you can smell the person. You have to have that conversation with other people who aren't here. This is not all of Berkeley. This is not all, I know, yeah. This is not, you have to, that's how, I agree, the training just sort of plays for you later that you remind yourself, when I learned in that training, I shouldn't be saying this right now. That's all the training is going to do. It's just going to hopefully remind you not to do. All of us. I'm in this too. I have implicit bias. I have racism. We're all a part of it. I'm a part of this. I'm saying I. But that's what we're here to do. That's why we wanted to have this. That's why we're going to have this conversation. All these conversations should continue. All of them should go out there because it's really important, and I'll bring it back to us as a family, that Berkeley is our home. And that when we walk around in the streets, that we feel like it's our home. And I feel like it's important to all of us here, but I'm only speaking for us. We want this place to be the place that we got the hell out of New York City for. This is on purpose. People have talked about this thing happening. I've seen some people online. I saw people say, like in music boards, this is so Berkeley. They're going to have a talk about a racist thing that happened. You're damn right, all right? This is the hashtag, this is so Berkeley. Take that, this is so Berkeley, out there into the streets. I'm going to try to hug everybody who wants a hug, if you want a hug. Some of you who know me know how I roll. I'm really tall. I'm taller than you think. Please take this out there into the streets. It's not about the Elmwood Cafe. It's not about what bad things happen to our family. This is about, we're all here because this has happened to all of us, or we want to learn more about it. Take it into the streets. This is so Berkeley. Thank you.
So let me just thank the panel members for being here. Thank you so much, panel members. For BUSD. I'm going to ask you to do something that may not be your custom, but usually across this nation, whenever we encounter great men and women, we stand and we give them applause and we honor them. And so tonight I'm going to ask you to do that for Kamau, Melissa, and for Michael, because they took a very private conversation and brought it to our community so that we can grow and change. So let's stand and give them applause. So here we go. We will end racism in Berkeley, and the change will start with individuals. So everybody just say, let the change? You say that. This is call and response again. I've got to teach you guys so much tonight. Let the change begin with me. All right, here you go. So be fruitful and multiply. All right? Thank you for being here tonight.